Jairo was a well-known man in his city. He held a prestigious position as head of the local synagogue. People respected him, consulted him about the scriptures, and looked to him as an example of piety and leadership. He walked soberly through the streets, and his words were always listened to attentively. But behind the public respect and reverence, there was a deeply human heart, the heart of a father. His only daughter was 12 years old. She was the joy of his home, the most precious gift the Lord had given him. Since she was little, he had watched her run through the halls of their house, ask questions about the world, and repeat passages from the scriptures she had learned at home and in the synagogue. There was a tenderness between them that transcended words. He had carried her in his arms when she was little, and even now, as she was growing up, he still liked to see her rest her head on his shoulder when she was tired. She was his pride and joy, his little girl. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. At that stage of life, when childhood was giving way to youth, Jairus' daughter was blossoming. There was a light in her, a sweetness that charmed everyone around her, and Jairus, always so steadfast in his religious duties, found refuge in her company, something that reminded him of God's goodness in an intimate and personal way. But no parent is ready to see their child suffer, much less to deal with the shadow of death hanging over the life of someone so young. When the first signs of illness appeared, no one imagined how serious it would become. There was still laughter, there was still faith, but little by little, the girl's frailty began to increase, and Jairo's countenance became more tense with each passing day. And so began the transformation of that man, from synagogue leader to desperate father. He still didn't know what he would do, but something inside him was beginning to stir, a restlessness that would push him toward the unexpected. Before continuing, I want to invite you to comment on which city or country you are watching from. Let's see how far this message is reaching. As the days passed, the girl's health began to decline rapidly. What had previously seemed like simple symptoms turned into something more serious. She no longer had the strength to get out of bed, could barely keep her eyes open, and her breathing sometimes became weak and irregular. Jairus' house, once full of life, now became silent, interrupted only by the muffled sounds of coughing, moans of pain, and prayers whispered in despair. Jairus' wife stayed by her daughter's side the whole time, trying to hide her tears whenever the girl slept. The servants of the house bustled about, bringing damp cloths, herbs, and water, trying to ease her suffering. But nothing seemed to help. Jairus watched everything in silence, his heart heavy. Every gesture of care seemed small in the face of his helplessness. As a leader of the synagogue, Jairus knew the scriptures well. He knew that God was powerful, that he had performed miracles in the past. He recalled the stories of the ancient prophets, of healings, of deliverances. But now it was different. The pain lived within his own home. It was not a theory, it was not a sermon. It was his daughter, his little girl. The nights became long, time seemed to slow down, and with it grew a sense of urgency. There were times when Jairus would sit by her bed for hours, just holding her hand, and when the fever rose, his heart ached as if each beat were a silent scream. No parent feels prepared to see a child fade away before their eyes. Fear, once just a distant thought, now dwelled in his chest. There were times when Jairo walked around the house in silence, trying to hold back his tears so as not to scare his wife even more. The girl's eyes, once lively and curious, were now dull, and with each passing day she seemed to drift further away. It was in this scenario of uncertainty and pain that Jairo began to remember someone who, according to what they said, healed the sick with just one word. A man who touched lepers, gave sight to the blind and hope to afflicted hearts. The name of Jesus began to echo in his mind, and with it, a seed of silent hope began to sprout. If this content is touching your heart, you can support this project by donating any amount by clicking on the "Thank you very much" button. Your support helps me to continue telling these stories with dedication. That morning, the sun seemed slower to rise, as if respecting the atmosphere of anguish that covered that house. Jairus had been up since before dawn. He had spent the night praying and glancing anxiously at the door of the room where his daughter was resting. The local doctor could do nothing more. Herbs and traditional remedies had not worked. The girl was between life and death. Then something inside Jairus broke. It was as if all his position, prestige, and doctrine no longer made sense. All he had left was love, and it was because of that love that he decided to act. He couldn't wait any longer. He knew that Jesus was back in town, that a crowd was following him. And he also knew that if there was any chance, however small, of saving his daughter, it was in the hands of that man. The decision was not easy. As head of the synagogue, seeking out Jesus meant facing criticism and perhaps even reprisals from the Pharisees and religious leaders who already condemned the Nazarene. But a father's love spoke louder than any reputation. Jairus did not think about what they would say, nor what he would lose. He thought only of the girl he loved. He dressed quickly, but with dignity. He descended the steps of the house with quick steps, exchanging a last glance with his wife, who understood without needing words. It was as if she were saying, "Go, try, do whatever it takes." In the streets, the buzz was already great. Jesus had arrived, and the people followed him fervently. Jairus crossed alleys and squares, his heart racing, not like someone going to meet a public figure, but like someone running after his last hope. In the distance, he saw the crowd gathering around a man in simple clothes. Even from a distance, Jairus sensed something different, a presence that broke down resistance. His feet quickened. He no longer thought about how he would be received. His soul cried out for help. With each step he took, he drew closer to the moment that would change his life forever. He was no longer the head of the synagogue. He was just a father about to throw himself at Jesus' feet. When he finally broke through the crowd, Jairus saw Jesus clearly for the first time. The master's appearance was not imposing in the external sense. There were no luxurious clothes or an entourage of important men around him. But there was something in his eyes, in his calm demeanor, that made Jairus' heart tremble. Without hesitation, he fell to his knees before him, right there in the street in front of everyone. This attitude surprised those around him. A leader of the synagogue, a man known for his dignity and position, was now prostrating himself in public, not as a teacher, but as someone broken who no longer cared about reputations. The crowd fell silent for a moment. The sound of his plea pierced the silence like a cry from the soul. Jairus spoke with a voice choked with emotion and his face wet with tears. His daughter was on the verge of death. He did not ask for explanations. He did not argue on the basis of scripture. He just begged, "Come with me. Lay your hands on her. I know that if you touch her, she will live." Jesus listened, and more than listening, he looked at him with compassion. He did not question his position, his previous faith, or his motivation. He just got up and started walking beside him. Jairus felt a wave of relief and hope. Walking beside Jesus was like seeing a light in the fog. His heart, still aching, beat faster. There was still time. Maybe they would make it in time. Maybe his daughter would live. The crowd followed them, each person with their own expectations. But for Jairus, each step was a mixture of urgency and reverence. It was as if he were between two worlds, the world of pain he had left at home and the world of hope that now accompanied him through the streets. He didn't know what would happen next, but at that moment, one certainty filled his heart. He had made the right choice. Trusting Jesus was the boldest step of his life, and at the same time, the most necessary. The group made their way through the narrow streets, and Jairus walked beside Jesus with his heart on alert. Every moment seemed too precious to waste. His mind was on his daughter, on her fragility, on the time that was slipping through his fingers like sand. Hope mingled with anxiety, as if at any moment everything could change. But then, amid the crowd pressing around Jesus, something unexpected happened. The master stopped. He looked around and with disconcerting calm asked, "Who touched me?" The disciples, confused, tried to explain that with so many people around, it was impossible to identify a specific touch. But Jesus insisted. He had felt power leave him. Jairus watched the scene with a heavy heart. He didn't understand why Jesus stopped at that moment, just when every second was vital. Despair began to resurface in his soul. He didn't dare interrupt, but his eyes betrayed his distress. That's when a woman, trembling with fear, approached and fell at Jesus' feet. With a broken voice, she told her story in front of everyone. 12 years suffering from an incurable hemorrhage. 12 years of rejection, isolation, and pain. And now, with a simple touch of his garment, she had been healed. Instantly, Jesus looked at her tenderly and said that her faith had saved her. It was a moment of peace and redemption for that woman, a miracle before everyone. But for Jairus, it was also a silent struggle between faith and fear. While the woman was being restored, his daughter was dying. It was as if time had been ripped from him. His gaze, full of love for that scene, also carried a weight. What about my daughter? What if it's too late? Waiting for another's miracle rekindled his fear of losing his own. Still, he remained there. He did not walk away. He did not complain. He waited. Perhaps, without knowing it, he learned something at that moment, that the faith that moves miracles is not only that which cries out, but also that which waits, trusts, and walks, even when everything seems out of control. The silence that formed after the miracle of the woman with the issue of blood still hung in the air when suddenly voices approached hurriedly. They were messengers from Jairus' house. Their faces were tense, their words laden with pain. They didn't need to say much. Just a glance, a gesture, was enough for Jairus' heart to begin to crumble. But they spoke, and the words came like blades. Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the master anymore. Jairus' world stopped for a moment. What he feared most had happened. Death had entered his home, and with it the weight of pain that cannot be explained. The hope that had guided him there seemed to dissolve in an instant. His knees buckled. The sounds around him became distant. The image of his daughter, her smile, her fragility, her sweetness, flew through his mind, and with it the anguish of having arrived too late. How could he bear such a loss? How could he return home without the life he had tried to save? But before grief could completely overwhelm him, Jesus turned to him. His eyes met Jairus's with a serene firmness, almost as if he knew exactly what was going on inside that broken heart. And then, in a soft but authoritative voice, he said, "Do not be afraid. Only believe." They were few words, but enough to stop the collapse of his soul. It was not an explanation. It was not a detailed promise. It was an invitation, a call to faith, not based on circumstances, but on trust in the one who was at his side. Jairus did not respond with words. He just took a deep breath, straightened up, and continued walking. What else could he do? He had trusted Jesus until then, and now, even in the face of death, he had to decide whether to continue believing. The crowd, previously euphoric, now followed in respectful silence. The mood had changed, but Jesus did not seem shaken. His presence still conveyed a calm that contrasted with the desperation of the situation. And Jairus, even though his heart was in mourning, chose to continue walking beside him. He didn't know what awaited him at home, but he knew he couldn't walk alone. The walk to Jairus' house seemed longer than ever. Every step was filled with pain, every thought fought against despair. But he continued, because Jesus was walking with him, and that, even in the midst of sadness, was his anchor. When they arrived at the house, the sound of grief was already spreading through the air. Women were crying loudly, following the customs of mourning. Family members were gathered, some in shock, others in tears. The atmosphere was one of irreversible loss. The girl was dead. The body had already been prepared for the burial rites. What had once been a home now looked like a sanctuary of sadness. Jairus entered silently. His eyes searched for his wife, who came to meet him with her face wet with tears. Her gaze said it all. She's gone. And for a moment, Jairus thought that perhaps he had indeed arrived too late. But Jesus entered with him, and when he heard the crying and lamenting, he said something that sounded absurd to those present. "Why all this commotion? The girl is not dead, she is only sleeping." The reaction was immediate, laughter of disbelief, mockery. How could anyone say such a thing in the face of death? Those who had been mourning now mocked. For them, there was no more hope. Death was final. It was a fact. But Jesus was not shaken. He asked everyone to leave the house. He dismissed the unbelievers, the noisy ones, the curious ones, and he remained only with Peter, James, John, Jairus and his wife. A small group, an atmosphere of faith. Jairus watched everything in silence. His heart, still hurting, beat fast. What would Jesus do? Would it be possible to reverse death? He had no answers, but he had decided to trust. It was a faith that was no longer triumphant, but broken. A faith that, even though wounded, chose not to give up. The house was now silent. The atmosphere, previously filled with crying, began to be filled with something different, a presence that calmed the soul. Jesus was there, and where he was, death did not have the last word. The room where the girl lay was immersed in stillness. Light filtered softly through the cracks in the window, illuminating the motionless body on the bed. There, where once there had been life, there was now only the silence of mourning. Jairus and his wife stood nearby, their hearts in suspense. They did not dare to say a word, they just waited. Jesus approached the girl with slow, reverent steps. His presence seemed to fill the room with peace. There was no hurry, no fanfare, just a sacred silence that preceded the inexplicable. Tenderly, he reached out and touched the girl's hand. His fingers gently enveloped hers, in a gesture of both love and authority. And then, in a soft but firm voice, he said, "Talitha Kumi," words that meant, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." It was as if time itself stopped to listen, and then, in an instant that defied logic and nature, breath returned to her body. The girl's eyes opened. Slowly, she sat up, as if awakening from a deep sleep. She was alive, whole, restored. The room was filled with amazement and emotion. Jairus and his wife were overcome with joy they could hardly contain. Tears flowed again, now tears of gratitude. There were no words to describe what they were witnessing. Death had been conquered there before their eyes. It was not just a miracle, it was a reunion with hope. Jesus, always attentive, looked at the parents with a discreet and simple smile. "Give her something to eat," as if to say that life went on, that this girl was no longer a memory. She was a restored gift. And then, with the same naturalness with which he had performed the miracle, he asked them not to spread the word about what had happened. He did not seek fame. His focus was love. A father's faith had touched his heart, and God's compassion had been revealed in that home. Jairus held his daughter's hand tightly, as if he never wanted to let go. Pain gave way to relief, and fear was replaced by an even deeper love. His daughter was alive, and he knew it would never be the same again. Jairus couldn't take his eyes off his daughter. Her every movement, no matter how simple, a blink of an eye, a shy smile, the sound of her peaceful breathing, was a living miracle before him. It was as if he were seeing his little girl for the first time, reborn, enveloped in a peace that only heaven could have brought. His wife, still with tears in her eyes, embraced her gently, as if holding something too precious to touch. The home that moments before had been invaded by mourning, now pulsed with life, and every corner of the house, once muffled by crying, was filled with the silent joy of those who had been touched by an unexpected miracle. Jesus, serene as ever, discreetly withdrew. He did not seek applause, nor did he demand recognition. His mission had been accomplished. The faith of a father had been rewarded, not because it was perfect or free from doubt, but because he insisted on believing even when all seemed lost. Jairus, still overcome with emotion, understood something profound in that moment. Everything he knew as a religious leader, the rituals, the traditions, the knowledge, was important, but none of it compared to the transforming power of Jesus' living presence. He had seen with his own eyes that the Master's touch was capable of overcoming even death. During the days that followed, Jairus' house remained silent about what had happened, as Jesus had requested, but the couple's gaze said it all. The gratitude, the amazement, the reverence, they were there, alive in every gesture, in every word. The miracle did not need to be recounted with grand speeches. It could be seen in the eyes of the girl running through the house again. Jairus' faith was no longer theoretical. Now it had a face, a story, a living memory. He knew he would never forget that day, and whenever he looked at his daughter, he would remember. There was a moment when all seemed lost, but a father's love found God's heart, and the answer came with life. The story of Jairus and his daughter is one of the most moving narratives in the life of Jesus. Not only because of the miracle itself, but because of the path that preceded it, a journey of love, pain, hope, waiting, and faith. What seemed like just another episode among the many miracles recorded in the Gospels actually reveals profound truths for all of us, even today. Jairus was a father, a respected man, knowledgeable in the scriptures, leader of the synagogue. But in the face of his daughter's illness, he put all that aside. His position, his pride, his reputation. He became just a broken man, moved by unconditional love, and it was in that place of surrender that his faith was born most vividly. His attitude teaches us that true faith often arises in times of crisis, not as an abstract concept, but as a real decision. To seek Jesus, even when all seems lost, and to continue walking with him, even when the news destroys our last hopes. Along the way, Jairus faced interruptions, saw others receive miracles while his world fell apart. But he did not give up. He stayed. He waited. He trusted. His faith was not perfect, but it was persistent. And it was this faith that moved Jesus' heart. The story also reveals the compassionate heart of the Master. Jesus not only healed, he cared, he looked, he walked alongside. Even when everyone said there is nothing more to be done, he said, "Do not be afraid, only believe." His words still echo today, like balm for troubled hearts. Jairus received more than his daughter back. He received a new understanding of life, faith, and the power of God. He learned that with Jesus, even death is not the end. The story of Jairus' daughter invites us to reflect on profound truths that still speak to our hearts today. It shows us first and foremost that there is no pain or loss that Jesus ignores. He sees every tear, hears every cry, and walks with us even when we cannot understand what is happening. His attentive and compassionate gaze reaches our darkest moments, and it is precisely there that he makes himself present. We also learn that true faith is not one that merely celebrates quick victories, but one that remains steadfast even in the face of death, silence, and news that seems to decree the end. It was in this scenario that Jairus discovered that persistent faith is the one that experiences miracles, not because it ignores pain, but because it chooses to trust in the midst of it. Often we may feel like him, seeing other people receive answers while our own needs seem to be left aside. It may even seem that God is late, but history shows that Jesus' timing never fails. He acts at the right time, even if that right time does not coincide with our urgency. This challenges us to surrender control, to trust, and to follow alongside the Lord, even without understanding his ways. It is in abandoning our own logic that we discover the power of trust. And finally, we see that there is immense strength in intercession. A father's cry for his daughter's life touched Jesus' heart. Likewise, today, the prayers of a father, a mother, or anyone who intercedes for others rise before the throne of God and can move heaven on behalf of those we love. If you enjoyed the story of Jairus' daughter and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.